The reading to a child is when they feel secure and when they feel loved. And they tell us this, the research will tell us this. They believe they will not be interrupted if they're in daddy's lap and he's reading to them. It's a very secure time. So now the children associate reading with love.
Don't be afraid of the dark. Be careful with stars. Not every light is gonna guide you, baby. Not every light is gonna guide you.
So, Dr. Kathy, today on the Celebrate Kids podcast, in this daily segment, Face in the Dark, there's some new data that I want to look at. It's showing that there's a steady decline in reading from the past 40 years. 31% of 13-year-olds have reported in 2023 that they never or hardly ever read for fun. And I want to repeat that, Dr. Kathy. 31%. Now, this is compared with 29% that reported in 2020 and 8% that reported in 1984. Now, in addition, only 30% of 8th graders in the United States read at or above their proficiency level. We've talked about that a lot here at the podcast. 1/3 of 12th graders are lacking basic reading skills too. And for parents like myself, we were really raised in this kind of like, take a look, it's in a book approach, right? The reading rainbow really was a part of my life. And it was a part of all of our lives. When we had something that we wanted to learn, we would go to a book. And now it's hard to watch our kids retreat or treat reading as something that's really obsolete. Not only are our kids not getting the exposure to things like vocabulary or even like reading comprehension that they need or that I feel like they need later on in life, they're also missing out on what I kind of think is the joy of reading and what they can learn about the world. This was all something that was documented recently in an article I found at the Huffington Post, and they talked about these different findings from parents, and it was really an interesting article. It kind of was fun for me to read through it, especially because I have a way of reading to my kids that makes it, I think, kind of fun. They always laugh and giggle because everyone has different voices, and if there's multiple characters in the book, I forget what voice is whose. And so then the kids are like, "No, that's not the voice, Dad." And I have to go through this library of voices until I hit it right, and then we continue on with the story. It's a lot of work for me to read, but really fun because I think that reading should be fun. But as we look at this, there's a drop in reading, and I've often wondered if it's because we've had a rise in other techniques or technologies that we kind of look at to do the things that reading helps us with. An example would be if I need to learn how to fix something in my car, it's more likely for me to turn to YouTube or maybe social media for my kids to learn something than to pull out a book or even pull out the manual. Let's be honest, I don't do that. But in that, those are things that we used to turn to books to, and now we just turn to other techniques or technologies to learn how to do something. Is it that reading really isn't applicable to everyday life that makes this kind of why there's been such a drop in reading? Does reading really matter for our kids beyond just, reading for fun? Should we teach our kids to read to use the manual when they can turn to YouTube? What do you think about this, Dr. Kathy?
Well, I love this discussion. For people who do not know, my background is in reading. I taught second graders for 4 years and then earned a master's and a Ph.D. in reading and educational psychology. And I was a professor for 7 years where I taught people how to teach children how to read. So this is a very personal topic to me, and I'm really glad we're discussing it. Reading is life-giving and life-changing. Let's just put that out there. So we learn to read, and then we read to learn. You learn to read, and then you read to learn. You don't learn to read because you just wanna check it off a list. Just like you learn math so that you can use math. We're not good in our schools, in my opinion, in most schools, we're not great at showing kids the reason they're learning something. If we don't make something valuable to them, why would they invest their time and their energy? Wayne, as an example, I'm gonna use you. You're in graduate school right now, and I'm excited for your goals educationally, and if there's a course you're taking and it's harder for you to connect it to your ministry goals, I imagine that that's harder homework to invest in. Am I right about that?
Yeah, and it's hard to even give it time because it's one of those things that I say, I'm never gonna have to do this thing. And that's really unfair, right? Because what do I know, right? I think that's the dynamic even inside of education is everything becomes about efficiency. It doesn't become about learning and discovering the world. It becomes about, well, what can I do with this today? Or what do I see myself doing with this in the future? And in order like, I find this even in my classes when I teach. If I give a ton of context to why we're learning what we're learning, because I think that the world today is different. Our students are different. Kids
Yeah.
are different. They need to know more today, probably than ever, why are we learning this thing? Because their whole world is about context. They have the whole world at their fingertips.
That is so good, and that's so helpful. So then back to this topic, we've gotta help children of all ages understand that we learn to read, and we read to learn, and we read for joy. That reading is one of those things that you'll have as a gift to yourself for your entire life. I love what you said already about you can see the world through the pages in a book. You know, I've traveled the world, you have as well. Many people don't get that privilege, but they can read about places they would like to go. And yes, we can read manuals and figure things out, and some of us who are word smart, logic smart, would rather learn through that manual. You've been in my home and you did use the manual to help me with something in my home. You're also very intuitive, but I saw that you had the manual open. That was encouraging to me because I thought you're going to make sure that this is working well because you were actually using the system's manual. So that really fed me, which I think is so fun. I think that why is this hard though? Um, Let me suggest a couple of things real quick. Way too many of our children have learned to read on devices. So think back toward the pandemic and the quarantine spirit. Can you imagine being first, second, or third grade and learning phonics over a screen? I can't. I can't imagine being an 8th
Mhm.
grader on a screen who doesn't like the topic, listening to a teacher drone on about it, and the teacher is calling on different kids to read out loud. I mean, it must have been just horrendously difficult. So let's just own it that the pandemic and the stay-at-home orders have certainly affected the way that they've learned many things, and I think reading and writing would be primarily challenging there. I also think that, little kids are handed devices. They're not in dad's lap being read to. They're not in grandma's lap being read to. And the reading to a child is when they feel secure and when they feel loved. And they tell us this, the research will tell us this. They believe they will not be interrupted if they're in daddy's lap and he's reading to them. It's a very secure time. So now the children associate reading with love and they associate reading with joy and reading with safety and reading with security. And those emotional things that come up when you read are significant. We're losing that. I can also mention just the busyness of moms and dads. Like I'm glad that your school, the school that you send your children to, wants all of you to read to the children as a family unit at night. I support that. Children learn vocabulary when they're being read to. They learn context and content when they're being read to. But moms and dads have to slow down, put devices down, prioritize children. And again, that is something that isn't as easily done as it used to be. So those are some of my comments about where we've gone with this. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah. I love that, Dr. Kathy, because as a dad who really does make time to read, and part of that's also because of the dynamic of the ministry, right? There's just a reality that Kathy's gonna look at me and I'm gonna say, "Did I, spend some time with my kids in this?" There is something though to that. When you said the idea of when I sit down with my kids and have them on my lap and read, you can you can see that, especially as a dad, you can see things just melt away and the world is different for them. But I wanna take that as a, inspiration for us as parents to read. I think it does build identity and security. I think it builds belonging inside of our kids. But when we work with our kids to then get them to read, how do we inspire our own kids to read? How can we guide them to the beauty and the joy of reading that maybe we've found, or maybe we've found an identity or purpose in it as a parent that this is helpful for me to read, but my kids aren't picking it up? How do we inspire our kids to read?
Yeah, no, it's such a good question. They need to see us reading, especially men. Boys need to see men read. Boys tend to be more academically delayed with literacy, reading and writing, speaking and listening. And that's too often because they either don't have a dad in the home, which just crushes me, or the dad isn't the kind of guy who reads. And I understand dads may be doing many, many, many other things well, and I acknowledge that. And yet, if we look at data again, it's very clear that boys think that reading is what women do. So men, you gotta read. Now they can see you read a manual for fixing a, engine in a car. They can see you read a manual to figure out, something else. They can see you read a website to figure out which park to go to for spring break. It doesn't have to be a book with pages that turn, although that would be ideal. and they need to hear you laugh, and they need you then at the dinner table to say, "Hey, Peter, I was just reading this book about psychology, and I learned this really interesting thing." So they need to see that you're interested and that you're teachable. So that's really important. And then also, how do we help our kids read more? We know their interests and we suggest things that are in line with that. I just spoke with a mom at my church just on Sunday who's has a middle school daughter who's really struggling academically and she loves art. If she could design her program for school, she would be art 8 hours a day. So I recommended that she find biographies and autobiographies that are age appropriate of artists. I recommended that she go to paint stores and art stores in town and get every brochure that she can, and that she take her daughter to a place like Hobby Lobby, and that they talk about discernment and vocabulary building, in a place like that. Just like I'll talk to moms and dads of maybe little boys and girls who don't like to read, but they love cars. Go to the car dealer and pick up every free brochure, and that becomes writing prompts and vocabulary development. If your kid wants to learn how to fly a plane, go to the American Airlines Museum here in Fort Worth where I live and make that a field trip day, and now do all kinds of writing and reading based on airplanes and how many screws and bolts are in an airplane, and how is it possible that they fly? Like, how do they get off the air, and how fast are they going when they land, and all those kinds of things. Interest, drive ability. And if we know our kids and our grandkids, we should be able to find things that will be interesting to them, that will motivate them to sit down and read.
As Dr. Kathy and I were talking today, it reminded me of a passage that comes out of Deuteronomy chapter 31, and I'll read verses 9 and 11. Moses wrote down this law and gave it to the Levitical priests. Read this law before all Israel in their hearing, Moses said. Before entering the promised land, Moses wrote down God's instructions, and he commanded them that they be read aloud to the entire nation every 7 years. Now, most people at this time weren't literate, so hearing the written word kept the community anchored in truth, memory, and even helped them carry it forward as an identity. In these ancient cultures, writing preserved the truth that they received and understood across generations. Reading and hearing writing was how people remembered who they were. Moses insisted on scripture being read because reading shapes an identity. It forms a shared story. Theologically, God chose written revelation so his people could rehearse his works again and again, letting his truth become the lens through which we really understand the world. So as parents and those that work with kids, when kids read books and when we read to them these books and stories and scripture, they're doing more than just learning. They're building memory and identity and even a worldview. Reading does train the mind to hold ideas, to make connections, to reflect deeply, and to rehearse what is true. Screens can give quick fixes and draw up information, but reading teaches kids to dwell in those ideas. So we can help our kids see that reading isn't just an assignment. It's a way that God's designed us as humans to remember who we are. And that remembering can be a really important light that our kids can carry forward into dark times. And that can be an encouragement for them. And I hope that this podcast does some of the same things, that it's an encouragement for you. I'm so thankful that you listen to this podcast every day, the Celebrate Kids podcast, especially this daily segment, Facing the Dark. On behalf of Dr. Kathy Koch, my name is Wayne Stender. We're grateful you joined us today, and we're looking forward to seeing you here again tomorrow.